afternoon, welcome to UK Column Live. It's the 28th of November 2012, it's just gone noon. Afternoon, Brian.
Good afternoon.
Good show today, I hope.
I hope so. Should we do the weather?
Go on then.
Well, today we've got blue skies, absolutely blue skies, no aircraft in the sky, which is surprising, and lots of sunshine, and it's very cold. And probably that leads us into our first topic today, which is the floods.
Yeah, local to us as well.
So we'll start off with a look at some local news from This is Devon, who've been reporting that David Cameron has been visiting Buckfastleigh in South Devon, cozying up to people who've suffered in the floods. And we certainly don't want to make light of the flood damage and the effect on families and homes, but we do think it's right to keep a little bit of a focus on David Cameron. And of course, here he is, beefing up his image as a loving, caring Prime Minister, and he's getting out and about to meet, or was yesterday, getting out and about to meet people.
Flown in by helicopter.
Flown in, jet-setted in.
Jet-setted in.
And here he is from Sky News, on the scene, being terribly concerned. But we just wanted to remind people in Britain that this is the same Prime Minister who is short of money to build flood defences and help the flood victims in UK, but he's spending billions of pounds of money on overseas wars. And indeed, we've already reported a few months ago that David Cameron and his cronies were helping to print money in order to fund the rebels in Libya. So what we surely are watching is gross hypocrisy from this man. And of course, it's all about image. It's not what he's really doing, but here he is. He's dressed down, he's out on the streets, he's looking a bit cold. Oh, and we are supposed to think that this man is a man to trust. Am I being a bit hard on him?
I think you're being perfectly fair, actually.
It was a shame that we didn't get any actual shots of him out and about in South Devon.
Yeah, it's a shame.
But of course, we're not the BBC, so sometimes it's difficult for us to get reporters out on the streets. But we're going to keep an eye on Mr. Cameron and what he's actually up to in the country. And we can probably follow along with this because, of course, if we take a quick look at what was done in Libya, massive destruction of the country, which was aided and abetted by not only Britain, not in our name, of course, but in Mr. Cameron's name. And we'd just like to highlight here that following the devastation of that poor nation state, which organisation has now come in order to help it rebuild, but none other than Common Purpose. So the document here, supporting capacity building in Libya, is boasting that the political charity Common Purpose has now started work on the ground in Libya as part of an EU programme. So here it is clearly telling us that Common Purpose is not a charity in the true sense of the word, but it's a partner and a European non-governmental organisation. So remember, of course, that although the press have been exposing certain aspects of Common Purpose over the last couple of weeks, what they haven't exposed is that Common Purpose is buried into the Conservative Party, and David Cameron, Francis Maude and Chris Patten, to name just a number, are absolute supporters of this pro-European and deeply subversive organisation. I don't know whether there's any comments from the studio on that. I'm being very forceful.
No, it's just no surprise, really, is it?
It's no surprise. And if we just move on, your favourite person, and you found something on Tony Blair.
Yeah,
here.
it was in the Guardian as well, but it was on his website. He's urged for UK to shape the future of Europe, and we both read this article, and he's not really saying a lot. He's just waffling on, really. The one bit I did find, the flagship policy of Europe is listing dangerously. As I've said before, to save it, I believe it requires a kind of grand bargain approach. So he's not really saying too much.
Well, we don't know what his grand bargain is. Of course, at one stage he was going to represent a major supermarket in the Middle East, so perhaps his grand bargains are tied in with supermarket stock. But what is very clear from this speech, I can't imagine he's written it himself, but it remains deeply pro EU, even though, of course, we're seeing at the moment the utter collapse of the European economy and the euro, and we're seeing Europe being drawn into an ever deeper morass of rioting, unemployment and instability. So
I think he's getting himself set up for his next job application, to
well,
be perfectly honest. That's my opinion.
That is absolutely true. And of course, just as with Mr. Cameron, we thought we'd highlight that in the background, of course, we've had Tony Blair's Iraq conflict, and here's the BBC now reporting on the crisis of orphan generation. But what the BBC is not reporting, of course, is the role of Tony Blair as surely a war criminal in helping to create the devastation in Iraq and produce this generation of orphan children.
Yeah, I've got a few figures here. A recent survey in Iraq has found 800,000 to 1 million Iraqi children have lost one or both of their parents. No one knows the exact number of Iraqi children that have been orphaned, but bombs, assassinations, still daily occurrence. The number of orphans is continuing to grow. There are children in private orphanage, are apparently the lucky ones. They have better facilities than the state-run orphanages. But yeah, all thanks to Mr. Tony Blair and Mr. Bush.
Thank you to Tony Blair, and thank you to Bush, I think we'll say. But of course, what we should remember is that children who are taken away from their parents or lose their parents become incredibly vulnerable in every sense of the word, but they're also extremely vulnerable to political indoctrination. And if the state can get hold of children with no parents or grandparents to bring them up and instill values, then of course the state can push in the values. And we're going to be coming on to this in UK. We'd just like to mention here that the Independent, but other newspapers are picking up on the they're calling it a $230 million fraud and trail of death, which just keeps growing. And this is around a Russian supposed mafia person called Alexander Perepelichny. I think I pronounced that correctly.
Try that again.
I'm not going to try that again. And what we're seeing is a story unfolding of murky movement of money where people are dying. This is a pattern which has now come into UK and follows fast on the heels of the fact that we are no longer controlling our borders. And of course, we've had common purpose trained individuals like Lynn Homer, who've been brought out of the public sector with a trail of mayhem in one part of the country and election fraud, moved into the UK Border Agency. And now we're saying as a nation state, we can't control our borders. We don't know who's coming in. And of course, this is the type of, this is the result. This is the type of individual that comes through. So if we're looking at this with horror, who are these people and why are they now resident in UK? We have to look straight back to Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and of course Cameron and Clegg, who at the moment refuse to take control of Britain's borders. You've got a little bit on Palestine here, which we normally like to do.
Yeah, Avaz has done a poll and put out, done some research. 3/4 of the UK voters back Palestinian claims to be recognised for their own state at the UN, which is according to this Avaz poll. It suggests that 72% of British public supports Palestinian claims for a statehood. 1.6 million people worldwide have now signed a petition backing the move. But interestingly, it's expected the United States and the UK are going to veto the proposal after going to a vote for the General Assembly on Thursday.
Right, and of course William Hague is right in the middle of the British decision-making process, and something that we've flagged up and will continue to highlight to viewers and listeners of UK Column Live is the enormous influence of conservative Friends of Israel. So we have an amazing situation where, in their own words, 80% of Tory MPs are under the influence of conservative Friends of Israel, but we don't show parity by introducing the same influence from the Palestinian side. So absolute bias
Yeah,
by the Conservative administration.
I was just going to quote William Hague last week in the Commons. He said, "We judge that this would make it harder to secure a return to negotiations and could have very serious consequences for Palestinian Authority. Our collective goal must be a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders with agreed land swaps. Jerusalem as the capital of both states and just a settlement for refugees."
Yeah, so whose agenda is William Hague running? Is it an agenda for the British nation state, or is he working for somebody else?
Well, it seems that way because 72% of us here in Britain would like to see Palestine as its own state.
According to that survey.
Yeah.
So we come back, of course, to David Cameron, because this is the man running the whole country in every department in the country. And papers are finally beginning to warn that the Leveson report is due out tomorrow. And of course, we will be reporting in detail on the implications of what Mr. Leveson has to say. But it's very interesting that we're now starting to see within the media a drive that we have in this article. 80 politicians from all three parties have signed a letter to the Prime Minister that statutory regulation of the press would be bad. We've got a thing here from Channel 4 News, and this is saying that 42 Tories are urging tough new laws to keep newspapers in check. So what we are seeing within the mainstream media at the moment is this enormous turbulence in the reporting of Leveson, the Leveson inquiry itself, and the impact. But at the moment it seems to us here that we're seeing a drive to distract people over statute intervention, when in fact what they really want is a common purpose style media standards trust to control the press, mainstream, and indeed organisations which are free press on the internet. Any comments on that, Mike?
Well, they're talking about making this one of the options, and it seems to be the option which is most likely, making this a contractual agreement between the newspapers and whatever the new regulating body is. We believe it's going to be the Media Standards Trust or something related to the Media Standards Trust. So newspapers, being commercial organisations, will make a contract with that body that they will behave in a particular way, and this is a restriction on free speech, because obviously if the newspaper finds itself 6 months or a year down the road in the position where it wants to do something, it's contractually bound not to do it. So it seems like they're walking into a trap.
And of course, if something goes wrong contractually, where does that end up in the courts? And that will actually put the matter back into the courts, controlled by Leveson's cronies in the judiciary.
And if he gets his payoff to become Lord Chief Justice, then of course he will be in control of the whole lot.
So just as we've seen Sir David Bell brought in from the Media Standards Trust to lead Leveson's inquiry team, and then Sir David Bell interviewed people he'd previously worked with a few weeks before as if they were independent. As you say, we can then be in the happy situation of Lord Leveson in charge of the whole lot and implementing the rules which he put in place in the first place. So the danger here for everybody, even if you believe in conventional politics, is that we are rapidly moving towards state control of the media. And one of the areas that we've been discussing here in the studio earlier is that the state control mechanism is going to target free press, such as the UK column and other people on the internet that are desperately trying to get the truth of the situation out there. So if you're with us today and you're enjoying UK Column Live as a free press, free media production, it's time for you to start really banging the table and getting onto your politicians. We would just remind you that, of course, Leveson took a huge amount of information and swallowed up millions of pounds. So here's the Independent saying 12 months, 378 testimonies, 4 options, 1 judgment. And if we just remind ourselves of the quality of the people that Leveson was happy to have in front of him, We've had people involved in sadomasochistic orgies. We've had people who've been caught in the back of cars with professional ladies. We've had pop stars, we've had media people, but what we haven't had is any representation from the real press or, in fact, the real general public. And what the media has been working hard to do, and this is quite interesting here from The Independent, is a paragraph where the thing is spun totally the other way. So what's wrong with the Press Complaints Commission? According to some high-minded MPs in the late 1980s, Fleet Street had become infiltrated with rent boys, spurned lovers and smear artists. Decency, privacy and old-fashioned honour no longer mattered, and the public was revulsed. The creation of the PCC, following a report by David Calcutt QC, was intended to restore confidence in the press. This seems a remarkable statement, bearing in mind that with the Jimmy Savile exposure, we're now starting to see that it's actually Parliament who are riddled with the rent boys, spurned lovers, smear artists and paedophiles, and of course they're very, very frightened at a free press starting to expose them. I'll just end on this slide that The Independent started to look at some of the options, whether it was greater self-regulation through to statutory underpinning. Our prediction is that Leveson will go somewhere in the middle so that David Cameron can say, well, I deflected state control of the media. We're going to use a corrupt media standards body, which the Leveson inquiries helped set up. But we wait to see. You've got a fairly tough slide here coming up, Mike, on the subject of Britain.
This is a report by Toby Bray, who runs Money Week, which he says is the UK's best-selling financial magazine. It was highlighted yesterday by Stacey Herbert on Twitter, and I believe, Lou, it was covered on Max Kaiser last night.
Max Kaiser, I saw it last night, yeah.
So, and what was he saying?
He was losing the plot, actually. The end of Britain, that's why he's come to Britain to host the show here, to watch the collapse of Britain. So,
I would recommend everybody watch Max Kaiser, of course, but, you know, I would like to just point out that, well, there he is. Have a look at him, watch his show from last night. But we have been talking about this same kind of problem since 2009. You know, the point I would make is it's good to see mainstream people like Toby Bray coming out and admitting what's really going on. But it's not really rocket science. We've got to try and get some broader coverage of this. It is common sense, and the problem is that the policy. It boils down to the policy from government. Now, out of Toby Bray's report, I wanted to pick two graphics. The first one is showing very clearly that government debt is not reducing as a result of the austerity policies. And actually, this is a very good graph because it shows quite clearly agenda politics at work. Because you'll notice that where he has the arrow, which shows austerity starts here, which is after the 2010 general election, you'll see that the slope on that part of the graph began at the end of the previous government's actions. So we had already started ramping up government debt. This is public debt before the general election, and now we've got it just going astronomical for the next few years. The other graph that I wanted to show was this one, and this is UK total debt as percent of GDP. Now, the reason I'm picking these two graphs out in particular is because this is stuff that we've covered in depth for years now. And now, just to give an impression of what is being talked about here, this is not government debt, this graph. This is showing the total debt. And to give our figure, our total debt in the UK, according to this graph, is 507% of GDP. And that breaks down to being 98% of GDP in household debt, 109% of GDP in non-financial corporations, 219% of GDP in financial corporations, so banks, hedge funds and other things, and 81% of GDP in government debt, which is 500% of GDP in total, the total debt. But what this graph doesn't point out, which we've pointed out many times, is the pension black holes in the public pension pot and the state pension pot. And these black holes have to be filled in somehow. So whereas this isn't debt in the traditional sense, it is a big hole in the public finances, which has to be, well, unless we're going to kill everybody, which is looking increasingly like we are, it has to be filled somehow. So, you know, we see this whole problem of government debt increasing, but yet the government doesn't seem to be spending its money on the right things. So we have the reports out from yesterday regarding the work programme, and what that showed was that until the end of July this year, 877,800 people had been referred to the work programme, and only 31,240 people had got jobs as a result. And that was 3.5%, and that's over a period of 14 months. Now, if you take the first full year of it, in fact, only 2.3% of people who took part in the government's job programme actually got a job at the end of it. And in fact, the point that was being made on many news programmes and comments yesterday was that actually if these people had just been left alone, they would have had a much better chance of getting a job. That actually people that are just doing the normal things to get a job, there's a higher percentage. Yes.
I heard today on the radio that one of these back-to-work schemes that the government put millions into has completely failed, with the majority of people who went on this course.
Well, that's what we're talking about. Yeah. That's what we're talking about, yeah. Right? So if we look, this came from Channel 4 News, and I thought it was quite a good little graph, which shows the total number of people that have been out of work since 1979. Now, the dark blue is people that are lone parents on benefits. The reddy pink is people on incapacity benefits. The purple is unemployment benefits, and the green is non-claimant unemployed. So this is people that are not in work but who are not receiving any kind of benefits at all. And you know, the first scam that you kind of notice is how the number of people on incapacity benefit has increased massively over the years, while the number of people on unemployment benefits has reduced. So this is fiddling the figures, getting people off unemployment benefits so they can reduce the headline figure. But the other interesting thing about that graph is the increase in the size of the green band. So this is people that are being kicked off benefits altogether or are not eligible for benefits. Sorry, excuse me. You have to wonder how these people are surviving. But ultimately, you know, since 1998 in particular, all those years that we had of the boom years where everybody was working and it was great, this graph seems to me to show that was all a lie, does it not?
Yeah. But of course, who pays for the statistics to be produced is a question which always interests me. And I've just got to say very gently that the UK column does not approve of the word worklessness because it's a politically correct word. But we're using this on our diagram today. I have to pick that up, Mike, because I feel
yes,
so strongly.
Absolutely, but this is somebody else's graph, so it's not my language, I promise you. Right? So, okay. Right. Now, the key point is that while we've got all this increase of government debt, the government is not using any of that money to actually improve the working prospects of real people or the real economy. And indeed, the effects of government policy are increasing exponentially. So what we have here is a report from the grocer, which is showing that the price of bread is rocketing in this country, particularly Hovis and Warburton's, but other people as well. We've got wheat prices around the world going up by 40-50%. This is going to have a big impact on our lives, soaring inflation, on the basics of life. I believe that Toby Bray had the title absolutely right. This is the end of Britain unless we do something about it now. It's no good waiting until the situation gets to the point where everybody recognises what's going on. We've got to be banging the drum for this right now, as we've said already on other subjects. But this is another key one.
What needs to be done, Mike?
We need to be investing in a productive economy. And you look around at the floods. You look around at 2 weeks ago we had a canal burst its banks. This was a canal where the banks were raised banks, and it flooded in a huge part of, was it Somerset, I think, and it basically stopped the trains running to Plymouth for about a week or so. I don't even know whether they're still running yet, but anyway, we've got infrastructure collapsing. We're remarking on the state of the roads every day. We've got the prices of electricity, water, all these things are going up because pipes the pipes are unmaintained. There's so much to do in this country to get it back on track. We could have everybody employed overnight if we had a government that was prepared to organise itself to do that.
Right, but we've got to absolutely agree with that. We stay focused here. The key thing is to understand that we have a cross-party political agenda at the moment which is designed to collapse Britain as a nation state. And if we follow through all of the things that we're reporting, we're not doing this to pump out negative news. What we're doing is trying to help people understand what is taking place on a day-by-day basis, but we're not repairing, rebuilding, improving Britain's infrastructure, because the ultimate agenda is to have the infrastructure in this country collapsing. It's to have industry stripped out, it's to have manufacturing stripped out, with the objective that we have people in Britain of whatever colour and background totally dependent on the state. And I know that David Miliband has been in some of the free media over the last 24 hours, I think, and pointing out how much he has been earning from jobs in the background. So we have the Miliband brothers running the Labour Party at the moment. Their upbringing and political background is fully Marxist, and of course they're showing the key attributes, which is living life as millionaires, while we have people at the moment who can't afford bread in the country. And this pattern is followed with Cameron and Clegg, who consistently hides in the background as an absolute puppet of Leon Britain and the European Union. So we need to get out what is happening in the country, because if we understand how the traitors in Westminster are dealing with Britain, we can deal with the problem. I'm trying to be a bit upbeat there. We've got some more tough stuff coming up.
Well, the final point I would make is that if we actually did what needs to be done, we would have because the country's in such a bad state, we would have employment for generations, and education and a health service. We could actually end up in a very good place in 50 years' time.
Right, and if people say, how do we afford this, then please have a look at what the UK column is producing about the greenback pound and the ability for Britain as a nation state to issue its own debt-free money, because that is the clue.
Maybe let's not send so much money to the IMF, maybe.
Not so much money to the IMF, absolutely. Perhaps we should ignore the IMF. We're going to move on with the story about the removal of foster children from UKIP parents. We've picked up on this article by the Mirror because we believe that this is a very significant article. It was written by a lady called Alison Phillips, who's recently been promoted within the Trinity Mirror organisation. And her headline is, "Why does no one have a care for these poor kids caught up in the UKIP fostering row?" Now, of course, the major piece of information which is not being reported in the mainstream press is that the key social workers who took the children away are common purpose graduates, and the whole point of common purpose is an ideology, is a political ideology, getting it through the back door, getting it into people in the public sector, and of course by going into schools and university facilities, common purpose can inject its ideology hidden and unseen throughout the public sector. So mainstream press is not picking up on this, and certainly Alison Phillips isn't. This is a picture of the lady. We like to have people identified so that we can see who's actually doing and reporting. And this is one of her comments, which I think is fairly significant. Council officials who took the children away from their foster parents for being members of UKIP, which they labelled a racist party, were misguided and stupid. My point here is that these people were absolutely not misguided nor stupid. What they were actually doing was implementing the very political agenda which Common Purpose has been pumping into local authorities and the public sector across the country. But Ms. Phillip goes on to make a tremendous amount of comment, because she starts to accuse UKIP of essentially being racist by saying they want to end multiculturalism. She even says that Nigel Farage and his chinless chums wouldn't be wringing their hands over the future of 3 such children. So she is going straight in on an attack of UKIP, and we're not here promoting UKIP as a party, because we don't promote any political parties. But what we're pointing out is the twisted reporting from the Mirror, which is trying to say that these people were extremists because they were members of UKIP. And if sorry, I'll just have to run through that again. I'd say that was a technical error, but I think it was finger trouble. And one of the key things she said is that yesterday in an interview, the foster parents spoke of our girls, but they were not their girls. They did not own them. Now, if anybody spoke about my children, I'd say my children. It's a very normal thing for parents to talk about our children, our girls. So the point is that this woman is using deeply political language in order to justify the fact that the state has taken more children away from a family, not for abuse, but simply for the views that the parents hold. Tie this in with Leveson, and what we see is massive state control of the way we think and conduct our lives. And I'll just link it in with this story from the Telegraph, where we've got the government now putting 1,000 extra health visitors in post next year. And what are these people going to be doing? They're going to be helping parents to bring up children, something that parents have done successfully for hundreds of thousands of years, but not under David Cameron's government or that of Brown and Blair. These are the people who are being politically trained as the Common Purpose warriors. So look at the linkages in those stories, and we will say to you and keep on saying that if we lose the free press and media in UK, then the dictatorship will install itself. If we keep the press free, I think we've got a chance. You've been broadcasting some very interesting stories over the last couple of days. Have you had feedback from that?
Had amazing feedback from it.
Right.
I interviewed Ben Fellows on the radio Monday.
Right, and he's talking about abuse by senior
politicians, yeah. And very interesting, loads to say. More interesting that it was the Cabinet Office were more interested in not placing a certain politician in Mr. Greer's office at a certain time,
right,
rather than Ben being touched up
by
a certain politician. Well, we've had Ben on here, haven't we? So is Ken Clark.
For the benefit of viewers, when information goes out, what's the reaction over text and comments are just shock horror, but then not we're really surprised, but then again I suppose we're not, in light of the Jimmy Savile, and a lot of stuff's come out that why the BBC focus, and why the press focusing on people who've passed away, and why aren't they dealing with current situations. That's been brought up a lot. Right, current people now. Okay, we're getting towards the end of the show. We were just going to mention very briefly Lord Patten. Well, Lord Patten, this is your story. My story is the next one. But Lord Patten has come out in the press and saying that Entwistle wanted more money. He wanted 530,000.
but settled for 450,000 for 54 days' work. And yeah, that's that
So we've got more turbulence. The real story, of course, is the paedophiles and Jimmy Savile, and this is a story which seems to have disappeared from the BBC.
Yeah, licence payers are going to be footing the bill for this inquiry into Jimmy Savile, and my point was, why don't we get Entwistle to maybe put some money towards it, considering he got all that money?
Well, that's absolutely true. And then, of course, we've now got the police admitting for the first time that politician Cyril Smith did sexually and physically abuse young boys in the 1960s. Of course, that was covered up, and the story of that cover-up is finally beginning to come into the public domain. But of course we got the Crown Prosecution Service, I think, saying, well, that wouldn't happen now. But all of the information coming into the UK column, and certainly other voluntary organisations looking at child stealing and child abuse by the state, are all reporting massive cover-ups, whether it's on the Holly Gregg scandal in Scotland, or it's to do with South Wales, or it's to do with Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. So at the moment, cover-ups. And an interesting lady here who you...
Liz Truss has come out and said schools should be given lessons in pornography. She said that children to the age of 10 should start learning about porn. But the study last month revealed children as young as 11 are becoming addicted to internet pornography, giving them unrealistic expectations of sex. Last night, Norman Wells from the pressure group Family and Youth Concern said bringing pornography into the classroom will introduce sexual images to many children who have not encountered them before and will arouse in some pupils a curiosity to search out more images for themselves. What interests me is that the National Association of Head Teachers have called for porn to be taught from the age of 10. Bearing in mind last year, or in this year, in June, a 14-year-old boy raped a 9-year-old girl after watching hardcore porn. And John Brown from the NSPCC has said it's a good thing for children to learn that porn does not mirror real life and gives a distorted view of sex. As long as this is explained in an age-appropriate way with the consent of parents where necessary, it can help children form healthy relationships. I'm sorry, you're talking...
Nonsense. We're allowed to say...
Yeah, and this is Liz Truss. She's the person all right behind it. And she's insisted lessons in porn can form part of an age-appropriate studies, but they're looking to start the teaching from age of 10.
And just before it goes out my mind, I know Mike's keen to come in here, but I think I'm correct in saying that this lady is one of David Cameron's key team.
Yep.
This is the sort of person he believes should be promoted and pushed forward in the Conservative Party. But of course, David Cameron is the man talking about blocking online porn. So what we've got here is this totally split message, which of course is designed to confuse.
Many people wanted to step down after she had an affair a few years ago with another Tory MP, but Cameron backed her.
Yeah, well, if she wants to promote it, perhaps she might. Mike?
No, I was just going to say it reminds me of No Child Left Behind, really. You know, no child is allowed to leave primary school. They're not going to have this stuff shoved in their face.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if they can read and write, so long as they get exposed to this kind of material.
Well, they're learning about sex at 6.
And it's deliberate. It is to sexualise children at the end of the day. So on that unhappy note, we've one further thing, which is that the 9th of December, an event put together by Ian Crane, but we've got several speakers, including myself, are going to be talking about what's going on in the country.
Ben Fellows as well, who was on my show on Monday.
Indeed. So if you're interested in really finding out what's been going on in the high-level magic circle paedophile rings, do come along to that talk, because that's certainly going to be one of the topics.
ianrcrane.co.uk for more information. Is it on the column website as well?
Not yet. No.
Not yet, it will be.
Okay.
Thanks very much for joining us. If you're liking what we're doing, please subscribe to the ukcolumn.org so we continue upgrading the studio, making documentaries, etc. Thank you.
And also keep your chins up and keep pushing out the information and the truth. Yeah. Exposure is 90% of the battle against these people. Thank you.
Thanks.